William Clouston is here, leader of the Social Democratic Party. William, welcome to the Big News Studio for the first time.
My
Good
first
to
time.
see you. There's loads to talk about this morning, not least because of what's happening actually in Gaza at the moment and around and about Israel. Funnily enough, I was watching a report last night about how things are in Israel, which you don't see very often. And Israel is a kind of almost like a ghost town at the moment. I was watching a report from Tel Aviv where people were saying there's literally nobody on the streets. People are in fear of their lives because the rocket attacks continue to come. People are in bomb shelters. You know, Tel Aviv, which is normally a very bustling, 24-hour city, is completely deserted.
Hardly surprising, given what we're facing. No, this is a tragedy. It's sort of a resumption of history, isn't it? A few years ago, you could imagine a situation in Europe, particularly where, we couldn't imagine a major war again. Now we've got Russia-Ukraine, which is, an absolutely phenomenal scale war. It's a huge scale war. People didn't think it was possible. It's possible. And then now this tragic resumption of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Yeah. It's a tragedy.
It really is. And I'm interested as well in the reaction, not just in this country, but in all sorts of countries all around the world. I mean, we saw that terrible incident in Russia where a mob running around. I mean, it's hard to believe you're even saying the words, running around an airport looking for Jews, basically.
Unbelievable. I saw that footage as well, Dagestan.
Here it is now,
yeah. Yeah, remind me not to visit Dagestan anytime soon. No, it was shocking scenes rampaging through there. Whatever authorities there were in that airport lost control rapidly. This is also what happens, Mike, with the power of social media. Yeah. And all you need is things to spread, conspiracy theories and so on. And they're literally trying to hunt people down in the airport. It's like a sort of a pogrom.
Yeah.
Horrible.
It really must be awful, particularly for Jewish people in London at the moment. I mean, I know it's happening in Manchester. It's happening. There was a big march in Birmingham as well. Kevin O'Sullivan was just telling us he was actually down there, and it's a very intimidating situation if you happen to be of the Jewish faith. Yeah. Basically they're saying, friends of mine are saying, we don't really want to go into central London while those marches are
I sympathise with them. I know how they would feel. When this happened, when this outrage happened, when this massacre happened, very quickly you had pro-Palestinian demonstrations in Manchester, in Glasgow, in London. Probably the worst, Mike, which everyone saw, was in Sydney, where people gathered in front of the Opera House. And
actually chanted...
Oh, it was disgusting. Utterly disgusting. Now, how anyone... I mean, Australia's got a Jewish population as well. What are they to think when people can go and do this with impunity?
And what also are they to think, like, as is the case in this country, when the police are sort of saying, well, this is all a bit tricky. Yeah. Well, it's not really tricky. If people are chanting those kinds of things, then surely that's an arrestable offence.
It is, but they're scared. And, we've seen this before, Mike, haven't we? The mainstream majority in this country are now used to what we call two-tier policing. We know it, right? Remember the lockdowns? Yeah. Remember the anti-lockdown protests were closed down rapidly, arrested, people were arrested.
People were hurled to the ground.
And remember the BLM protests? Oh, that's fine, that's all right, let's not bother with that. And then you get these very large...
Isn't it interesting, though, because back then, in the BLM days, the police were taking the knee, but they were also covering up statues for fear that they might be damaged. Now they're saying, and they've said this in a tweet actually to me, there's no law against people climbing on statues as long as they're not damaging them. And you kind of going...
Well, they're just taking the mickey.
You're just looking for an excuse now not to arrest people.
You are, because they're scared. It's because of the numbers. And I've been in London, 3 weeks running, and I've seen these very large protests. I'm in favour of people's right to protest, peacefully. They can put their point of view, and it's very important in the West. But there's also this thing called civilised toleration of differences. Yes. And I'll give you an example of that, Mike, a really brilliant example, which is Chris Law, the SNP MP. He attended a rally, a pro-Palestine rally in Dundee, his own constituency, and he was shouted down. He was trying to make a point, which actually was a very conciliatory one. He was shouted down, he couldn't even deliver a speech because of the vehemence of the crowds there in Dundee. Right? And people are scratching their heads, and how could this happen? If you live in this society, in a multiracial, multi-ethnic society, you have to practice civilised toleration. You can't shout people down just because you disagree with them.
This feeds back, does it not, into things that you and I have spoken about before, whereby, if people want to come and live in this country from other countries, and many of them have come from Palestine, many of them have come from other Muslim countries, where the law is a lot less tolerant than it is here.
Of course.
And I think it's wrong for people to come to this country and make use of a tolerant law in order to be intolerant.
Yeah, and some of them, it's probably a minority, but some of them are very intolerant, and some of them are uttering not just anti-Semitic things. There was examples on Saturday of people saying other racist abuse to people. Police are just standing around watching them.
Right.
They just lost the bottle.
Yeah.
They are terrified, actually,
because once
Mike.
you don't do anything, and I accept that there is a sort of restraint required in these situations. You
Yes.
don't want to cause a public order,
Yeah, of course.
massive riot. I get all that.
Yeah.
However, there's somewhere in between, surely. Standing around watching. I mean, one of the things that they responded to me to was a guy who was on top of the Lloyd George statue with a flare.
Yeah.
And they were standing there talking to him as if he was a 6-year-old who was refusing to eat his cheese sandwich.
Yeah,
Please come down. If you don't come down, we're going to have to do something. And it was like, well, what are you going to do? And he came down, his face was covered, right? Didn't know who he was.
Yeah.
He had a flare, which could have been damaging the thing. And he just came down, they let him go.
Yeah, but proper policing in a democratic state is without fear or favour, and they're not practising, I'm afraid. And this is, and I actually think I agree with you, Mike. I think it just invites more extremism, more. They'll push it as far
Well,
and far as
it
they
doesn't discourage people from going, does it? I mean, what you'll get now is the next march will be even bigger.
Yeah, but I'm not. Yeah, but
the
hold
next
on.
march will be even bigger.
Okay, no, we've got the right to protest. We're a democratic, open society, right, Mike? But I've been in London 3 weeks running. There's been massive protests every single Saturday in Whitehall and at London Bridge and Parliament Square. So you've made a point. Do you have to have this every week? I don't think so.
Well, that's what they say. And I'm worried about the weekend that we have Armistice Day.
Yeah.
Because I know that's on a Sunday, but nevertheless, there's going to be problems unless the police get to grips with this. And just to sort of give the total bizarre nature of all of the things that are going on, one of the stories that I saw over the course of the weekend was a story about a guy called Abdul Wahid, head of Hizbut Tahrir, which is that organisation which is a prescribed terrorist organisation.
Banned in many countries, yes.
Banned in loads of countries in the Middle East, not banned here. He's basically been on these marches, but he's also been known to have offered to do a very welcome punch on the nose to Israel. He welcomed the slaughter of the 1,400 Israelis. This happened on October the 7th. Yeah. He's in the NHS. He spent 20 years working as a doctor in the NHS. Now, his identity has been revealed over the course of the weekend. Do you think there's any likelihood that the NHS will do anything about them? I very much doubt it.
They need to. They can't stand by like lemons and watch people say things like that.
Yeah.
If it had been the other way around, Mike, you'd lose your job instantly.
Yeah.
If you said, you know the difference between Arthur and Martha, you'd lose your job instantly.
Yeah.
It's completely unfair.
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about. It's not a level playing field. So for an organisation like the NHS to not take action, I'll ask you this, right? So if you were a gay member of the community in North London, you went to that doctor, do you think you'd be treated properly?
Well, it's very unlikely, one would have thought.
I don't think so.
I think, and he works in Harrow. He's privately educated. He works as a GP. I mean, extraordinary.
No.
Incredible stuff. One other story about the immigration problem I just want to touch upon, I'm going to talk about it later on the show, is I've been proved right yet again, a story that came out over the weekend that many, many people coming here on student visas, it turns out, are now getting here and then claiming asylum.
Of course. No, this is a complete, utter racket.
Yeah.
I mean, apart from the fact that universities are vastly overexpanded, it is not socially useful, for a start, to have half of our school leavers going to universities. Yeah. This is what David Goodcock calls the university industrial complex. It's a complete racket.
Yeah.
They're selling some not very good degrees for debt. To be fair, the only part of the university sector that pays for itself is the foreign student sector. Yeah. But that is abused. People they're not coming here to be educated, many of them. They're coming here as a route to settle.
To get boots on the ground, if you like.
Yeah, boots on the ground, yeah. And we need to wise up. I've spoken at, it's the conference season, so I spoke at New Culture Forum conference a few weeks ago, and our own conference and the Battle of Ideas. And I've made the point, we need a mass immigration pause in this country to get on, to find a new us. It's a precondition, I think, for a good future here. Yeah, I think that has to happen, because otherwise they'll never catch up with the numbers either. Exactly. Let's talk about Keir Starmer. He's going to have a tough week, I think, because, as we were saying earlier, he's now got Sadiq Khan, Anas Sarwar, Andy Burnham, Hamza Yusuf, I know he's not in the Labour Party, but still will bring pressure to bear. I don't see his ability to hold the line on this Israeli sort of policy of his, do you? Well, it's already gone. I mean, I say it's already gone. So he's in all sorts of trouble. The whole idea of a single line from the front bench has collapsed. He's got probably 40 or 50 people in the PLP that vehemently disagree with him. And, I mean, his initial response, I think, was reasonable and probably admirable, but he's got a coalition in the Labour Party, and not just in the Labour Party, in his voting group. Yeah. 70% of Muslims in this country vote Labour. He's terrified of losing them. So he's trying to keep them on side.
But at the moment, he has lost them, hasn't he?
Yeah, he's lost them. Yeah, he probably has. And it's very interesting. And I think that, you know, on a broader point, that would give me the indication we're probably going to head for an October election next year.
Yeah.
Because I think the Tories have an opportunity here. Because the longer it goes for Starmer, the more it'll sort of unravel. But the fundamental problem here is a basic one, which everyone knows. He leads an unstable coalition.
Yeah.
The unstable coalition is, if you want to put it at the extreme end, it's queers for Palestine.
Yes.
That's the problem, and that is not, I'm afraid.
No.
That is
well,
not.
I mean, over the weekend, we saw even Mick Lynch getting in on the act. He was up on a stage somewhere calling for a ceasefire.
Yes.
And, of course, those who are calling for a ceasefire, without giving any context and without suggesting that somehow that's OK to keep the hostages there in Hamas territory while there is a ceasefire, they're making out anyone who doesn't want a ceasefire as some kind of bloodthirsty warmonger. Yeah,
this is a polarised situation. I mean, you know, what do they expect Israel to do? Israel has a right in international law to react, to degrade Hamas after the massacre. Of course it does. It has a right. It also has a duty to do that. Obviously, people calling for supplies to get into Gaza, which is hell on earth now, and that's important as well. But it quickly polarises, and I didn't see Jeremy Corbyn criticise the massacre. I haven't seen that yet.
No, I mean, he spoke in Parliament last week and was urging for a ceasefire in the same way. But this is the trouble for Keir Starmer, isn't it? Because in the end, he needs the votes, but he also doesn't want to lose the sort of middle ground that Peter Mandelson and Tony Blair and others are telling him that he must hold on to in order to win. So he's in a sort of cleft stick, really.
Total, utter bind, and it's not easy for him. I think I'll give him a tip, though, Mike. If you do an interview on another station, should we name it LBC? He did an interview.
We can.
And he answered the question. He was quite, it's quite a thoroughgoing answer he gave.
It was.
But you can't then say, "Oh, well, I thought I was answering another question."
Well,
Sorry, you just lose.
Simply not believable.
Ridiculous.
It's not credible.
Totally.
Because actually, funnily enough, we looked at this last week because the Times very helpfully ran a transcript of the conversation. And if he was answering the previous question, the question didn't actually reveal that particular answer because the question previously was a completely different subject.
Mate,
clearly he was just trying to wriggle around on the edge of a stick.
This is a guy who earned a living as a lawyer.
No.
You can't say you didn't know what the question was. That is ridiculous.
No.
And that is his vulnerability because he's inclined to say these sort of things. It's like saying, that his cervix difficulty with women. He gets himself into trouble quite often. And
do you think it's because he doesn't actually have any convictions? Because when he speaks, he's clearly thinking, what's the best way to answer this question, as opposed to, this is what I actually believe.
Yes, it's the vase theory. He's got the vase. He thinks if he doesn't do anything wrong, he'll win the election. I've followed Starmer for years. The only thing I've ever seen him carry conviction on is his conviction that this country shouldn't govern itself and should be governed by the EU. He's really, really keen, and you can see it in his eyes. He's really keen on that. On economic policy or housing or anything or trade, I have no idea what the guy thinks, and probably he doesn't.
No, because when you answer a question, and it's like they say, and I'm not suggesting for a minute that Keir Starmer is in any way telling lies or not telling the truth, but, you don't have to kind of invent a narrative. You can answer honestly. You don't have to keep remembering what you're supposed to say because you actually believe it.
Yeah,
if you keep saying the thing that you believe, then you'll never have to change your story.
No, we don't. I mean, in the SDP, I just say, I've said before, and I'm quite unusual as a politician saying this, we believe in industrialisation, control of immigration, we think we're good enough to govern ourselves and so on. We continue to say these things. Most people in Britain believe it. And I say, look, if you don't agree with us, don't vote for us, vote for someone else.
Yeah. And what do you make of all of these people who now say, well, of course, the ceasefire is something that most people in Britain now want. There's been a couple of YouGov polls. It's a bit like saving the planet for me. If somebody comes up to you and says, do you want to save the planet? You're not going to go no. If somebody comes up to you and says, do you want them to stop killing each other in the Middle East? You're probably going to say yes, because it doesn't sound very good. If you say no, I want them to continue to kill each other.
A lot of this depends on the polling question and so on. I totally agree. Mike, remember this, all the people that are calling for a... It is hell on earth. I'm appalled by the whole thing. But Israel doesn't have an option but to act to protect its citizens. And I'd remind people calling for a ceasefire this very important point. We used to have one.
Yeah.
On the 6th of October.
That's what I say. Yeah. That's exactly what I say. And you have to take the view of the Israelis, quite rightly, that they cannot ever allow this to happen again. Oh. So in order to stop that from happening again, you must decommission Hamas.
You don't have an option. It's the only democratic state in the Middle East. They don't have an option. They're under a duty to protect their citizens. What do they expect Israel to do?
Yeah.
It is a tragedy.
It is. It's awful. And it's been going on for a long time. We get all that. But after what happened on October the 7th, I think the limited options are there for all to see.